All right, welcome to the Ironwood Gym. Today we're going to talk about box squats and more specifically the benefits of the box squat. And going back a little bit in history, box squats not that long ago, maybe 15 or so years ago, were the thing. Like everyone was supposed to be doing box squats because they were so much superior to all other types of squatting. Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that that is true. The box squats are still a tremendous exercise, and it seems like they're kind of getting tossed to the wayside now. Some people are still doing them. Some people have completely cast them to the side. So I want to go over in this video what are some of the benefits of box squats. Pretty much, if you're doing box squats, you're going to receive these benefits. And also some of the things that are not always true. Some people like to claim that they're true, but they're really only true in certain circumstances. So I want to hit both of those topics, and hopefully you can get something out of this that you can take towards your athletes training, your lifters training, or maybe even your own training. All right, so one of the first claims that people like to make is that box squatting helps improve explosive strength. And that's just not necessarily true. It can be true, but not always. So just because you're using a box doesn't mean you're training explosively. It doesn't mean you're going to improve your power output. The explosive strength, any exercise can be performed explosively. Simply lift a submaximal weight at maximum speed. That's how you become explosive. That's how you're going to improve power output. It doesn't matter what the exercise is. So if you're doing a box squat with 50, 60, maybe even 70% of your 1 rep max, whether you have accommodating resistance on there or not doesn't really matter. But if you're utilizing a submaximal intensity, but you're lifting at maximum speed or maximum intended speed or compensatory acceleration, as Fred Hatfield used to call it, then you can improve your explosiveness. It's a very good tool for that. But if you're loading up maximal weights, or if you're training to failure, if you're doing 85, 90% and training to failure, or if you're going above 90% and training with maximal weights, that's not going to improve your explosive strength directly. Can it help improve explosive strength? Yes, but with those intensity ranges by themselves, that's not going to help improve explosive strength. All right, so the second point that I'm going to make here as far as things that aren't always true is that the box squat improves recovery. And in reality, that's not true at all, okay? And it's starting to get passed around that just because you're using the box squat, your recovery is going to be better, or it's going to enhance your recovery. In a certain sense, that may be kind of true. So Louis Simmons used to talk about how the athletes there at Westside, they would recover better from the box squat than they would from the free squat, okay? It's not anything magical about the box squat. The big difference here is how much weight they're able to handle. So their absolute load with a free squat may have been 10 to 15% higher than what they can handle in a box squat. So in that sense, recovery became easier from the box squat than it did from a free squat. That's just considering the absolute load. This exercise, the only thing it does is limit how much you can actually handle. Most people are going to be in the 85 to 90% range of their box squat compared to their free squat. So if they can box squat 400 pounds, they're probably free squatting 450 pounds. And that's just a rough number thrown out there. I didn't actually do the math for that. But you get my point. There's a difference. You're going to be handling less load, less absolute intensity in the box squat than the free squat, meaning recovery is going to be easier with the box squat than the free squat. Now, for most lifters, it's probably not going to make that big of a difference. Remember, Louis Simmons, Westside Barbell, their guys were all squatting 800 to 900 pounds raw before they put their equipment on. Okay, so, and some of them were going up above that, up to around 1,000 pounds. So for them, that is a huge difference. If you're squatting 1,000 pounds before you put your gear on, then you're going to go put your gear on and you would squat more without the box. When you put the box in, you're going down to about 850. okay? Maybe 900 at best. That's 100 pounds, 150 pounds difference, which is going to be much harder to recover from. The other thing with the squat versus the box squat is that the box squat does not have an isometric portion in the bottom of the lift. In a free squat, when you come down with that eccentric portion of the lift, when you get to the bottom, you're going to briefly pause. It doesn't have to be a long pause, but there is a pause where you're motionless. At that point, you're performing an isometric contraction. Isometric contractions are harder to recover from than concentric contractions. So if you sit on a box, you fully sit on it and deload, you're not performing that isometric contraction to the same extent that you would be with a free squat. Therefore, in that sense as well, it does make it a little bit easier to recover from. But in and of itself, it does not enhance recovery. It's just easier to recover from than a free squat. All right, so the third point that's not always true about box squats is that they enhance or strengthen the posterior chain. And I know some people right now are going to get real tight about this, real upset about it. It really has nothing to do with the box. It has to do with how you're squatting. So if you squat like a weightlifter and you sit straight down and let your knees come forward, but you sit on the box at the bottom, you're not going to be targeting your posterior chain any more than you already were with a free squat in which you're squatting the same way. You're still going to be hitting your quads a lot harder than your hamstrings. Okay? With the posterior chain, the way I squat, when I box squat most of the time, yes, it absolutely hits my posterior chain harder. But again, we have to clarify what we're actually talking about. And this sort of goes back to the video I did on high bar squatting and low bar squatting. I wish those terms would be tossed out the window because the only significant difference that has is the bar position. Okay? Everything else that determines what you're getting out of the squat comes from the movement of the hips and the shins. Okay? So if you're sitting your hips back and your shins are staying vertical, you're going to get a lot more posterior chain. If your knees are coming forward and your torso is staying more upright, then you're going to get a lot more quads. So if you going back to Westside Barbell and Louis Simmons, they squatted with a wide stance. They set their hips back hard. They had more of a forward lean, and their shins stayed completely vertical. And even on the box, sometimes they would be beyond vertical. So in that sense, yes, it is absolutely strengthening the posterior chain. But again, it really determines on how you are squatting when you're using the box. The box itself does not mean you're automatically training your posterior chain harder. It might mean you're training your quads harder, because if you're letting your knees come forward, your stance is narrow, then you're putting more emphasis on the quads, and then when you deload on the box, now your quads have to contract even harder to come off the box. So if we look at it from that perspective, it's actually training the quads harder. So it's not always a posterior chain developer, although it does a good job of helping improve the posterior chain if you're squatting in a manner that utilizes your posterior chain. All right, so now let's look at some of the benefits of the box squat. And these are things that are true most of the time, if not all the time. And the first one I want to hit on is breaking the eccentric-concentric chain. Box squats were intended to break the chain. All right, and that's I've got a video out on this, check it out. I'll just hit it really quickly here. It's not that complicated, but as you squat down, that's the eccentric portion of the lift. When you sit on the box and you deload on the box, you're essentially breaking the chain, because what would normally happen without the box is after you squatted down the eccentric portion, you would have a brief isometric contraction, and then you would have the concentric contraction coming back up. With the box, if you actually sit on the box, you're going to break that chain, because you're going to squat down with the eccentric, you're going to sit on the box, you're going to deload, which is going to take away the isometric contraction. It's not going to happen. And then you're going to come up with the concentric contraction. So by taking away the isometric, you're breaking the eccentric-concentric chain. That is a huge benefit. That will aid in the development of explosive strength if you're training with proper weights, because you're now going from a relaxed and a static state to a dynamic state, which is a big deal. It will really help improve explosive strength. It will also help kind of go back to the recovery aspect, because you're taking away that isometric portion of the lift. The isometric does add stress to the lift and even causes soreness, which some people don't like to talk about that because they want to put it all on the eccentric, but soreness comes from the isometric as well, since it's a yielding isometric, and the eccentric-concentric chain is going to take that away. But in my mind, that really is the biggest benefit of the box squat. Now, a clarification here, because there is some times where it would not be, you would not be breaking the eccentric-concentric chain. I've seen coaches that have their athletes squat down, they touch the box, but they don't sit on it. Okay? If you're not actually sitting on the box, you're not breaking the eccentric-concentric chain. Those coaches really just use it as a depth indicator, and they do have their athletes pause. Now, I've seen other coaches solely use it as a depth indicator. And going back to that for just a second, pausing does not mean you're breaking the eccentric-concentric chain. Because if you're just grazing the box and you're not actually deloading on the box, you're not breaking the chain. So the next one is that coaches that actually only use it as a depth indicator, they don't even have their athletes pause, so they'll go down, they'll just touch it and immediately come back up. Again, you're not breaking the chain. You actually need to sit on the box and deload in order to break the eccentric-concentric chain and receive the benefits of breaking the chain. All right, so the second benefit of the box squat that happens pretty much all the time is going to be depth consistency or depth control. And with depth, if you always squat to a 13-inch box, your body is going to get used to squatting to a 13-inch box. Okay? And when you take an inch off of that, you'll notice that when you get to 13, all of a sudden, boom, you fall that last inch. Okay? Because your body has gotten used to that exact depth. It knows exactly when to sit. It knows exactly when to release the glutes. And all of a sudden, it's an inch lower, and your body is not prepared for that. So it does a good job of teaching you exactly where you're at in relation to the box that you always squat on. As soon as you change that box, your body's going to start to have some confusion. But the same thing with a higher box. So if you were always squatting at 13, all of a sudden you throw a 14 in on your last set, just 1 inch higher, you're going to hit that sooner than you anticipate. Even if you're thinking in your head that it's higher, you're still going to notice you're going to hit it sooner than you think. So it is a good way of learning where that exact height is. I think the problem with this is with younger lifters or athletes that are trained exclusively on the box, never allowed to free squat, and then they feel like they don't know where they're at whenever you take the box away. And it does become a problem. So then as they're squatting without the box, they're starting to squat and then they're guessing as to where they are, and all of a sudden they start changing their technique. So for younger lifters, for athletes in the high school, college setting, you don't want to have the box in all the time and then just take it out all of a sudden. You need to get them used to squatting without the box, and over time, this will help them learn their depth without the box. But initially, it does cause some problems for younger athletes. All right, so the third benefit of the box squat is that it can be a great teaching tool. And the first thing is you have to be able to utilize it yourself as a coach as a teaching tool. If you're not capable of utilizing it as a teaching tool, then you probably shouldn't use it. But as a teaching tool, there's 3 things that I want to point out. And the first one is that it allows you to stop on the box. Okay, so you can have an athlete or a younger lifter or even an experienced lifter, if you want to make certain points, you can have them pause on the box and you can physically move them. You can point to different things that they may have done wrong. You can explain things and then have them perform the concentric, which is a great teaching tool because now you have time in the middle of a rep to actually explain something. You can have them pause for 5 seconds. You can point out 2 or 3 things really quick with like 1 or 2 word verbal cues, and then they can come up with a concentric, and then you can talk to them between reps. But that's not always possible, or it's not as feasible with a free squat, okay? Because they're not gonna have a box to sit on. They're gonna be focused more on fighting to stay in correct position or not sink lower. They're gonna be focused on their legs burning. With the box squat, they can actually sit, make sure they stay in good position, but you can explain some things to them or have them make some adjustments. The next thing is that it allows you to coach the bar path. It's going to be a little bit easier on the box, especially with newer athletes. You know, you're dealing with the freshman that has never squatted before. You're not going to be able to coach bar path in a free squat because they're going to be all over the place. So if you have them on a box, it's a little bit easier to coach that exact bar path that you want and then take them off the box, and hopefully they can replicate that bar path. The third thing, it's not necessarily a teaching tool, it kind of is, but I've seen athletes that, especially squatting with the wide stance, they don't have the flexibility to do it. Even powerlifters, they're starting to learn to go with a wider stance, and they don't have the flexibility to get out there. So you can actually start them with a higher box. You could, if they need a 12-inch box or a 13-inch box, you could start them with a 16. You can start them with a 15 and have them work there until they're good at it. They're hitting everything right, and then you move them down 1/2 inch or 1 inch. This may take time if they don't have the flexibility, but it also allows you to make those adjustments within the set. If they're normally a tight person, you start them on a little bit higher box, you take out 1/2 inch or a mat, which is usually 3/4 inch, whatever you have, and on the next rep they're a little bit lower. If they know you're going to do that and they're doing it every rep, they can adjust to it. But it also allows them to develop their flexibility throughout the set or over the course of time. It may take weeks, it may take months, but they can still get quality work in by moving the box just 1/2 inch lower. It's going to challenge their flexibility. As long as they're able to stay in good position, now they're going to start to develop flexibility in that position. Over time, you should be able to get them down to a parallel box. So it kind of is a teaching tool, it's kind of a flexibility tool, but it is beneficial either way. So those are some of the things that people like to claim are the benefits of the box squat. Hopefully this clarified some things. If you've never heard of what the benefits are and you're just curious, hopefully this helps you out. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments down below and I definitely will respond to you. But until next time, always be in the pursuit of strength.